Dan Peterson.
Well, let me say first off, thank you for having me tonight. It's great to be with you. I've had the chance to do this maybe in 5 or 6 other Tea Party groups around the state of Florida in the last couple of months. And I've lived a lot overseas and traveled a lot in the world, and this kind of group is one of the things that makes the United States absolutely unique in all of the world. And so it's just fun. This is what America is tonight, what we're experiencing, and very, very few people know about it. So it's great to be here. I became the director of Coalition for Property Rights about a year ago. I had worked in the Florida House and the Florida Senate and had done some lobbying and community work with a phone company some of you might be familiar with called Sprint, Embark, CenturyLink. And maybe some of you know my counterpart. I was the counterpart to Margot Odom, if you know that name around here. But one of the, that was just about a year ago. And it was probably in December that I was asked to be on a radio interview. And I said yes to it. And, the first questions were, about CPR, Coalition for Property Rights. It's been around for 11 years. It was started by a small group of businessmen in Orlando, Florida, that began to notice an erosion of property rights, and no one was speaking out to that issue. And so they formed this organization as a platform to begin to speak on behalf of private property rights. And so they formed, it's a 501c3. We live off the donations of businesses and individuals, things like that. So I was very excited to get a chance to become the director of it, because property rights are at the core of our national heritage and value. Very important stuff. So I was on the interview, and we were doing the natural questions. At the end of the interview, the woman who was doing the interview said to me, "Well, you probably are really against Agenda 21, aren't you?" And I said, "I'm not sure if I know what Agenda 21 is." And so it set me off to going to look at the internet, to look it up, and see what was being said about it. And I met a lot of groups, Tea Party people groups, that were out speaking about this thing called Agenda 21. I was very intrigued. So I didn't know any better. I went to the internet, I went to the UN, and I downloaded Agenda 21.
Oh,
Shows you how important this message must be to all here. Oh, yeah. Uh-oh. So anyway, I went to the UN website and I began to download Agenda 21. Well, my paper tray ran out over and over again. This is Agenda 21 here. It's about 300 to 400 pages of very fine print. And I took it to Tallahassee because we were involved in fighting that septic tank legislation that was up there and trying to put something in place that was good for property owners. So that's what I did in all my spare time. I just read Agenda 21, and I was absolutely shocked by what I read. And you won't see the name Agenda 21 out in public because it's not ever advertised that way. It's in 1,000 different places in 100 different names, and we'll talk about that tonight. But I was amazed at what I read, and it began for me a search to understand what it all meant. And what I found out is most of the people that I knew about Agenda 21 were very passionate about it, and they knew so much about it. But when they tried to describe it, they would get lost in the weeds, and people would just, Agenda 21 is so massive, it is so infiltrated every part of our society. If you try to go to all of those places, you just get lost in it, and you fail to see the significance. So I kept looking for a way to explain it to people like Representative Metz and people at the County Commission, people at the City Commission, in a way that would be highly objective and really get at the core of what Agenda 21 is all about. So, Lord willing, tonight, trying to put this in a form that anyone in this room tonight, you could take this to any legislator, any elected official. That was me, not that. Okay, good. And you could use this to explain exactly what was explained earlier and lay it out, and it only takes about 20 minutes to do. You can take it out and talk for an hour on it if you want. But what I want you to sort of imagine yourself doing this presentation tonight, because it's all laid out. I want to say that everything that I put, the predecessor to this was, I was asked to write an article for the James Madison Institute, which is an electronic journal. And that's what got me going on this. How could I describe Agenda 21 and sustainable development in a 3,000 to 4,000 word document? It probably is 5,000 words, but that led me to that. Then we put this in a speech form, and we did a PowerPoint. Everything I share here tonight, you can get on our website, which is profrights.com. All of my contact information is on the brochure that you have. And by the way, let me just tell you what the Coalition for Property Rights is. We're a movement of property rights advocates. We want to do two things: promote private property rights and protect private property rights. We do it through three ways. One is through educating people as to what property rights are and how they're being deteriorated today. Second thing is through advocation. We get out in the trenches and go talk to people about it. And then the third thing is what we call activation. We actually have a 2-hour training seminar to equip someone to be a better advocate and to fight an issue and how to build your own local movement. So education, advocation, and activation. And you can read about that later. But this is all on the website at your disposal. It doesn't cost you anything to get to it. And you can take this and download it and use it anytime you'd like to, okay? So, let me, okay, I'll just move forward, I guess. So Agenda 21, when we present this, what Agenda 21 means, it is a new global partnership for this word called sustainable development, and it is the agenda for what they think of as the 21st century. This was first officially launched in 1992 in Rio de Janeiro at the Earth Summit that was sponsored by the United Nations. Sustainable development is the key word, and you've probably heard that word more than you'll ever hear Agenda 21. Here's what it means: meeting today's needs without compromising future generations to meet their own needs. And they describe this in 3 E's of sustainability. The first E means the environment, and we've all heard an awful lot about sustaining the environment. There's huge money into that. But equally important is how to sustain the economies of the world. And then they have this third E that is called how to sustain equity, and that is code for a word that we're all familiar with, thanks to our president, social justice. It's a big word there. Now, in the manual for Agenda 21, you can read this on the UN, under Sustainable Development. For Agenda 21 to go ahead and pursue Agenda 21 and fulfill its objective, it's going to require a substantial flow of new and additional resources to developing countries. And that means they have to come from developed countries, of which we are probably the most developed and the wealthiest. And so what it means is, for sustainable development to happen everywhere, in the environment, in the economy, and then in equity, it's going to require a tremendous transfer of wealth from our country and other prospering countries into the developing countries. And we've heard a lot about transfer of wealth. Some of the things they'd like to do with this, they'd like to eradicate poverty and hunger and ill health and illiteracy, just to name a few. By the way, all of this in the executive summary of Agenda 21 that is on the website that I mentioned to you. Everything I'm sharing with you tonight is from first-hand sources, and it's all footnoted and documented. So I'm not telling you what other people say about Agenda 21. You're hearing tonight what it says all about itself. That's enough to pronounce gift, okay? Now, in the United Nations Habitat Conference that was held as a predecessor conference to Agenda 21 officially being launched, this is a quote from their preamble. Land cannot be treated as an ordinary asset controlled by individuals and subject to the pressures and inefficiencies of the market. So here's their take on private property use. It says if you own private property, you should not be treating it as an asset that you have control of. You shouldn't even be in control of it as an individual, and you you shouldn't allow it to be subject to free market principles. But that's not the end of this. The quote continues, private land ownership is the principal instrument of accumulation and concentration of wealth, and therefore contributes to social injustice. And if unchecked, it may become a major obstacle in the planning and implementation of the development schemes, and that means the goals of Agenda 21. So we as property owners are an obstacle to Agenda 21. So our right to private property has to be removed. And then they sum it up, and this is their quote. Public control of land use is therefore indispensable to its protection as an asset and the achievement of the long-term objectives of human settlement policies and strategies. We'll talk about what that means in a minute. But again, let me just emphasize this. Private property should not be in your control. It should be in the public domain. And we are an obstacle to all of this happening. So what that says is, for sustainable development to happen, there's a requirement, and that requirement is this: a transfer of private property ownership and control to public property ownership and control. Obviously, we all know public means government of some sort, okay? So keep that, and I want to say, I'm all for clean water, clean air, clean soil, the efficient use and the proper stewardship of our environment. But what is at the heart of Agenda 21 is the removal of land from private control and ownership to public, and that's why we have to fight it. Doesn't mean we have to be against every little thing that could be a good thing, but again, this is the motivation that's behind it. In its final form, this is what the United States would look like when Agenda 21 is taking place. This is called the Wildlands Project. Again, you can find this on the internet and read all about this. What this calls for, and this was so well documented just a minute ago, thank you for saying it, it requires removing people into urban areas, which they call human settlements. And you don't see those because they're dotted mostly along the coast and around the Midwest and stuff. But we are to all live in these human settlements that are basically, the transportation is public, or it's bicycles, or it's walking. It's mostly like living in high-rise apartments with retail stores on the ground floors. Everyone lives in kind of condo style above that. Lots of restrictions. Around the human settlements, there will be things called buffer zones, which will be highly restricted for humans to go to and highly regulated. But the majority of land, which is the red and the yellow and the orange that you see on this map, this is what they call core wilderness area. And it's defined by them as a place where humans are the visitor. Not the resident, but the visitor. So very true what's happening at all these levels. There's always going to be this push to get humans to move into the urban settlements and free up all the land out there into the wilderness. That's where they'd like to take this. Just a minute before we go ahead. Now, one of the things that's interesting to me and why I'm so interested in this is I spent 14 years of my life back in the 80s and the 90s living in Moscow, Russia. And I was working with a mission group that maybe some of you know about called Campus Crusade for Christ. And I directed the work there. Part of it was covert in the 80s when communism was there, but then when freedom came in the 90s, there was an incredible opportunity to do whatever dollars could buy, and they could buy an awful lot in those years. But the Soviet Union of those days was really the Wildlands Project. Imagine this. I lived in the city of Moscow, a city of 16 million people. That was, at that point, the equivalent population of all of Florida. Imagine all of Florida living in one mega city, surrounded by a big ring road, as they called it. There was not one single home, single dwelling place. There was no private property. Everyone, for the most part, moved around by the subway system and a very, very dilapidated transportation bus system, trolley system, things like that. Goods were very scarce. Sustainable development was really at work there. I can tell you all about that. And, rights were just non-existent. I had 6 personal friends that went to prison back in the 80s for their faith. And we met illegally in apartments, and it was a horrendous place to live. In fact, I would say the Soviet Union, if you took away their military might back in those days, if you went there, you would say this is a third world country. Now, here's the interesting part. The Communist Party, ruled the former Soviet Union. and as dilapidated and as backward as their country was, do you know what the Communist Party slogan was? It was the Russian word "Vперед." And you would see these huge banners that would sometimes be 8 and 10 stories tall and 100 yards wide, and it would have the face of Lenin and Marx and Engels, and they would all kind of be standing together, you know, like a trio, singing trio almost, going in this word under it, Kommunism, "Vперед." The word "Vперед" translated into English is the word "forward." So, I'm sure that's a coincidence.
Oh, man.
Anyway, just so you know about that. Here are some of the things that the master plan of Agenda 21 calls for. First, it calls for the shaping of public opinion through Agenda 21 public relations friendly campaigns like Earth Day. That is a perfect example of one way to shape public opinion and to lessen their attention to where this is really going. A second thing is organizing legal mechanisms and regulatory systems to write and then to pass Agenda 21 friendly laws, ordinances, standards, and regulations. This has all been planned out in incredible detail. Third, it calls for the establishment of agencies to monitor and enforce compliance to this. The EPA is a perfect example of this. That is an agency that is in place, and you know, they're talking about an international version of the EPA now in some of the treaties that are being considered by our government to sign. Agenda 21 calls for the teaching all personnel such as school administrators, school teachers, professors, students of public education, institutes, colleges, and universities. You know, you can get degrees now in sustainable development and in city planning, things like that. And it's all coming out of Agenda 21. It also calls upon the preparation of the media and business and industry to accept and then promote these friendly concepts and standards. It's, you know, how many businesses do you know that want to carry the label? We're you know, green. I mean, I think of Publix. And, you know, most of the stuff they want to do, I support, but whether it's subconscious or whether it's on purpose, they buy into this promoting of the green agenda. It also calls for the training and certifying of public administrative, planning, and management personnel. There's probably a good chance that every city administrator and a lot of the other administrators, the city planners, have all been trained in Agenda 21 friendly certification classes, and they don't even know it. And that's because it's not called Agenda 21. But they have that mindset and that philosophy, and they make decisions based on this. And then finally, of course, it calls for the electing and the influencing of Agenda 21 friendly elected officials. And thank goodness here in Florida, we have some pretty good legislators who are conservative people who are aware. They may not be aware that it's Agenda 21, but they value personal freedom, personal responsibility, and fiscal responsibility. So, okay, can we go back to the other one? Back, yeah. I want you to see this. I know that you can't read the detail of this. This is an Agenda 21 UN scorecard. This was developed 5 years. And what they do is they track, I think here, 33 or 34 different areas in the nations of the world as they're applying Agenda 21. And so it's, you know, one of the things that they track is, does your nation have an Agenda 21 website or a sustainable development website? Does your nation have sustainable development plans? Does your nation have plans to introduce sustainable development into mass transit or education or agriculture? Do you have a plan to change the consumption habits of your nation's citizens so that you will be compliant with Agenda 21 principles? I mean, this is incredibly detailed. Someone is working on this today, and you can see the progress. And this was only after the first 5 years. So this is serious business. Now, the thing that catalyzed all this and makes all this explode in the world is this thing that we have come to know as global warming. Global warming, stopping global warming is not the objective because, frankly, I mean, if you look at the science, there is no such thing as global warming. And that's why they call it now climate change, because they say, boy, that's a tough one. But anyway, global warming is nothing but the catalyst to create fear and to create a sense of urgency that if we don't buy into Agenda 21, our nation is doomed. So it's false, but it's out there and people buy into it. What most people don't know is there is a global support network for Agenda 21 that has been around and is continuing to grow. One of those things is a governance system of regional councils. And the way this works, it's happening in Florida. There's a plan called, I think it's called 750 or 735 or something like that. A number of 7 counties in South Florida have gone together to build a regional council that will determine the policies, and they will rule the policies of South Florida by, I think, by 2050 is what they want to get it done by, 2030 or 2050. And this actually is in existence. It's been launched. And this, again, reminds me of my time back in the Soviet Union. In the Soviet Union, there were elected officials. There was a beautiful constitution that was written about the rights of every citizen. There was an elected parliament. Of course, all the elections, there was never more than one candidate running for an office. But they had this pseudo-constitution and a pseudo-parliament, and they said this was our government. But on the side was the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, and it operated more as a regional councils. And so all of the policy was created and dictated by the regional councils. And so the governments over here, the government merely implemented what the councils told them to do. Now what's interesting is, you'll laugh at this, you know what the word for council is in Russian? Soviet. It's Soviet. Soviet. And so when you say Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, you were talking about 15 republics that were committed to socialism, that all operated on this regional system, and they'd all banded together in this one union. So Union of Soviet Regional Socialist Council. So that's literally what USSR meant. And so there's this plan is not just in the microcosm in Florida, but it plans to have these regional councils around the world that are transnational. And those things are being implemented, and there are councils and there are conferences that meet regularly, and the UN pays for it all. Yes, ma'am?
Dan, how does that compare with myregion.org in Central Florida that's been in existence for at least 8 years?
Well, I actually asked one of their former directors on that, and it's something I want to go back and research. I don't know, but everything, and I went to a lot of the earlier myregion.org planning sessions and stuff, and a lot of these concepts were built into it. Now, to my knowledge, they have not promoted setting up this council that would actually set the policy for the whole region, and then the city and county and state governments would just be implementers as opposed to policy setters. So I think it bears looking at it. So
NPOs or another. Yeah.
So anyway, but this system of councils is out there.
I worked in Russia, Cuba, East Germany, and some of the Soviet bloc countries. And the one thing they had in common was utter decay.
Well, and again, that's what my observation was. And all that says that totalitarianism does not work. When something belongs to everyone, it belongs to no one. And so you only do what is safe and what is predictable. Entrepreneurship is totally dead. Okay. Well, moving on here, there's also a financial network that handles all of this, and you're familiar with the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. They are all set up to help assist with these transfers of wealth. And then there's also a trade network, the World Trade Organization. And Agenda 21 calls for the alliances and the policies and the way that trade will move around the world. And if these massive transfers of wealth are going to happen between nations, it's very important that a World Trade Organization be out there setting the pace for that. Then there's a system of jurisprudence, and this is the one that scares me, and that's the World Court. You know, our government is about to sign some treaties that will submit our national sovereignty under UN dictate. And when we get to that place, that's going to be a scary. In fact, I was getting a Coke over here at a place just prior to coming in here tonight, and NAR has this powerful commercial, and maybe some of you have seen it, but it talks about some of the treaties, and one of the treaties will basically call for the registration of all personal firearms in addition to what's already out there. And once that happens, it's just another short step to take away. So, finally, under all of this, I don't know if you're aware of this, but there's a system. It's called the System of Environmental Economic Accounts, and this is a UN organization that is setting global standards carbon footprints and emissions and water quality and you name it. They're setting global standards for this. And then what they have is every country will have an account. And if they're in compliance, there's no problem. But if they're not in compliance, then a country can be fined and, or punished in some degree for failing to meet the UN standards that will be around the world. Okay. And then finally, tying all of this together, there are numerous systems of data collection, information, and technology that wrap all of this together. It's a tremendous information system, and it's out there today. Remember, this has all been going on for 20 years, so we're way behind this. So it's great that a lot of this is getting exposed. Now, if you're like me, you're asking the question, and I know you're not probably, but rhetorically, I did ask this question. Because this has been around for 20 years, and this thing is so huge, why don't I know about it? Because hearing that kind of scares me. So there's really 4 reasons I want to share. First off, when George H.W. Bush was president, he actually went to the Rio Conference in 1992 and signed off on the document committing our country to it. Now, because it was what they call a soft treaty, it did not have to be debated in our Congress, and it never was. It was never discussed. He just signed it. It was sort of a PR coup for Agenda 21, but that's all it became about it. However, a year or 2 later, President Bill Clinton stepped in, and he established, through an executive order, the President's Council on Sustainable Development. Again, it was never debated in Congress. It was never discussed in the media. It was done quietly. This involved, I think, 15 members of the cabinet and another 15 or 20 people who were a cross-section of public officials and industrial leaders and other types of business leaders. And that council, they began to open the floodgates for sustainable development to infiltrate our country. And from what I've read, one of the first things they did was they paid an organization called the American Planning Association, gave them a couple of $1 million to write a manual on how to write and then implement into law Agenda 21 friendly laws and standards and ordinances. And I'll share with you a piece of that. I've got a chapter of it with me. It reads like crazy. But anyway, that's another reason we didn't know about it. It's never been debated in our country. There's a third reason, and that is all of Agenda 21 and sustainable development has never been like this great government program that, boom, everyone hears about. Not like healthcare and Obamacare, stuff like that. This has all happened at the most local levels, and I'm speaking of cities and county levels. And one of the culprits here, and I should say it happens at the local level, and it happens through hundreds of organizations that are called non-government organizations, NGOs, they're 501c3s that are created to carry out this. The most famous one is this one that is called the International Council of Local Environmental Initiatives, ICLEI. And again, the word local environmental initiatives is very critical here. Here's kind of how it works. Our tax dollars go to the government. Our government then sends them out and gives some money to the Department of Labor, Department of Interior, Department of Defense, Department of State, all these departments. Then a lot of these departments turn around and give money back up to the UN for so-called projects. And then the people in the sustainable development world at the top of the heap at the UN take those dollars and they give grants to organizations like ICLEI to implement sustainable development in our country. That's how the money works. So we are basically paying for sustainable development in our own country. And I just wanted to mention one thing here. I went on the ICLEI website just to show you. I mean, this. A lot of people want to say, oh, this is a conspiracy. This is not a conspiracy. This is wide open. It's out there. And this is something I took off the ICLEI website. And I don't know if you're aware of this, but they boast how the title of this was Stimulus-Funded Programs and Opportunities. Through the first Obama stimulus program, they got nearly $13 billion to distribute in the form of grants. And these are the grants that they got and the amounts of money that they went out there and every grant got. So again, we're paying for this noose to be placed around our neck. Now, by the way, this is a big organization. It's one of the biggest. They've recently changed their name to Local Governments for Sustainability because ICLEI has gotten such a negative name. But in the U.S., there's over 500 cities and counties who are members of this organization. You pay money, you pay dues based on the population of your city or your county. And in Florida, you know, some of the cities, Tallahassee, Orlando, Key West, some of the counties, Alachua, Miami-Dade, Orange County is a member. Seminole County, where I come from, used to be a member, but they dropped their membership. Speaking, let me just take a parenthesis. The man that, you know, passed the septic tank legislation that we all had to work to repeal, and we did repeal in the last legislative session, was elected last night to the County Commission of Seminole, Florida. And his name is Lee Constantine. He was a representative in the House, and then he was a senator. And when I heard about his getting into that, there was another candidate in the race, and I jumped on board with her campaign, and we worked on that, and the past commissioner there, so we sent out all kinds of mail, and he won the vote. He got 33% of the vote. And it was because there was no runoff in the election, he wins the election. He'll actually have to be in the general election against a write-in candidate, but we know what that means. So that was a sad day for Seminole County and what's going to happen, because he's on several boards of U.S. Green Cities, and he works with Conservation Florida and a lot of these green organizations, and I'm sure he'll be pushing that in Seminole County. But anyway, Florida has an awful lot of members. In the world, they have more than 1,200, and a couple of other organizations to note. I've already mentioned the APA, American Planning Association. If you just go on their website, it's just filled with sustainable development language. Another one that's just a huge one is this thing called the U.S. Green Building Council, and they are part of an international network of councils like this. And again, it is all sustainable development stuff, and they are training all of our people who do our city planning and our city administration. So this is a big deal. Here's the other reason we don't know a lot about this. Sustainable development has its own special jargon, its own language. If you don't speak the language, you don't know what they're talking about, and you just you tend to discount it. So it sounds warm and harmless and fuzzy, but I want you to see a quote from a man. This is a guy named Gary Lawrence. He was an advisor to President Clinton's Sustainable Development Council, and he gave an address in the UK in 1997, I think was the year, and he was giving a lecture. It's actually a paper he wrote. I've got a copy of the paper, and you can read the whole paper on the website if you want to go to it. But again, he was speaking to this group about electing officials who would be positive forces for sustainable development. So listen to this quote. He says, participating in the UN advocated planning process, i.e. Agenda 21, would very likely bring out many of the conspiracy-fixated groups and individuals in our society. He's talking about us, I guess. This segment of our society who fear one world government and a UN invasion of the United States through which our individual freedom would be stripped away, would actively work to defeat any elected official who joined the conspiracy by undertaking local Agenda 21. So, we call our process something else, such as, and get these words, comprehensive planning, growth management, smart growth. Where have you ever heard those terms before? Everywhere. So, exactly. We live under the yoke of all of that. And again, I'm not saying that there shouldn't be wise stewardship of our natural resources, and we shouldn't be efficient in what we do, and there should be some planning and some things like that. But again, this is their underlying thing. It's not only a transfer of private property into the public sector, but it's done by deception, and they change the wording to accomplish their mission. Here are some of the other fuzzy words that you might be aware of, things like, obviously, environment, affordable housing, quality of life, that's so important, and sanctuaries, and social injustice, traffic calming, restoration, regionalism, all of these things. This is their vocabulary. Now, we use their vocabulary because it's again, it never started this big fireball that hit the United States. It was like lighting 1,000 fires everywhere, slowly, and it's been building for 20 years in our country. Well, actually more than 20 years. So here's some questions I tend to ask myself. Oh, let me mention this. Just a couple of weeks ago in Rio, there was the 20th anniversary of Agenda 21 being a formal thing. And everyone met for another Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro. And just to alert you as to some of the things they discussed, Agenda 21 is sort of changing its name because Agenda 21 sounds negative now. So we always look out for this word, the Millennium Project. And it calls for a fundamental shift in the way we think and act. That's not unlike somebody else on that same thing. It also calls for transforming the global economy, and they work on three levels. At the local level, they do this through land use planning, and we've already heard about some of the land use planning. At the national level, through energy use regulation, and that's a big one, and we're going to hear more about that. At the international level, they do this thing called technological diffusion. So at the highest level, it's a study of how ideas and concepts can flow through a culture. So, the African cultures or the European cultures, Asian cultures, ideas, there'll be different ways to get these concepts through. So they're studying the means to do it, and then they'll introduce all of this energy stuff and all of this land use planning. By the way, let me just say one thing too. Talking about the Wildlands Project, and that sounds far-fetched. Did you know that the western United States, from probably the Rockies to the west, is more than 50% owned right now by government? And Florida is owned by 42%. 42% of our land is owned by government of some type. I don't know if many of you, about a week ago or a week and a half ago, there was a huge article in the paper about the Obama administration wanted to send something $99 million down here to buy up a lot of land again between the Everglades and I think Central Florida. And there's all these projects, these things called Florida Forever and stuff. They just buy the properties. I was in a symposium on eminent domain in Gainesville maybe 3 months ago, and a man got up to speak, and he said, they introduced him as the man who is the Alachua County representative for the Alachua County version of Florida Forever, where they try to buy land and put into conservation. So he got up and he talked about all the lands they were able to buy, and he said, well, then the economy went south, and we didn't have any money to buy up any property. So he said, you know what we're doing? So we went through the whole county, and now we're laying out, and we're declaring private property to have conservation easements. And when your property is declared to be in a conservation easement, you cannot even cut the grass there. So, it revealed the strategy. If they can't buy it, they will just take it as a conservation easement, and then you wrap around that all of the regulations and restrictions when you go to use your land, and pretty soon it really starts to disappear. I've been working with some people in the area of Northport, and these were some ranchers. They had 5-acre plots and ranches on their land, and it's zoned as agricultural. And according to the state statute, they are exempt when they want to build some sort of a facility to store feed or do something with farm animals. They don't have to pay a lot of the things that you'd have to do if you did it in downtown Paris or something like that. Well, when they went to apply and get their permits, they were told, oh, well, your land has been rezoned, and so you have to pay all these permits, and you don't get all the exemptions that you thought you did. And I'm finding that's a common thing that's happening, and that would be worth something, I think, in the coming up the legislature to consider, is how to help those people, because there was never public hearings. They were never notified that their zoning had been slightly altered, and now they've got to jump through all of these hoops. Now the big deal is, in the future, that's all supposed to be wilderness land, so if they can move people off of that land, without having to do anything, an eminent domain, it goes to the good for them. So,
well, what they do is they create the comp plans for the county, and they supersede the zoning restrictions. So all of a sudden, if you're in an area that you had certain zoning, and you thought you could go to appeal it at a zoning commission, now you find that you've got comp plan restrictions that you cannot appeal, and they supersede the zoning, and that's how they're doing it.
So
it's in place here in Lake County.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And then if you go to contest it, you can bring a lawsuit, but they can outlast you in a lawsuit, and your money will run out before their money will run out. So, and I've met with people. Are you familiar with the 8.5 mile square area down in Miami-Dade? Las Palmas. That's an area where the government started going in there and just going into people and saying, your land is a wetland, you have to cease and desist, and they've lost a lot of property.
tax advantage also when they own this land? They're taking it out of the public sector. Would that be an avenue to approach to make a special tax assessment for anyone who buys up land like that?
I think when they take the property, that property is taxed at a lesser rate. I don't know exactly what that lesser rate would be, but that might be one way. I mean, to me, that is a taking of property, and I think if government wants to do that game, they strike that, like see something put in our Constitution or introduced into state law that says, then you have to justly compensate for the people to some degree. And I don't think that'd be a hard thing, but that would be a worthy objective. Anyway, here are just some questions maybe, and I'm going to run through these quickly so we get out of here for soon. Why should we place our property under so much restriction? Why should public policy favor a transfer of private property to community property? Why should government own so much land? Why does government need to own 42% of Florida? I mean, every acre that's in public domain means it can't be taxed and, broadening the tax base. So it's an economics issue. Why should government agree to subsidize public transportation or agriculture as they do? Why should industry and business submit itself to so many regulations? Why should we refuse to develop our own natural resources and destroy things like our own clean coal industry? Why would we choose to deny the building of something like Keystone Pipeline that could help us? Why should our education system ignore so much of our historical foundations but encourage studies of globalization and statism? Why should so many U.S. tax dollars be sent to other countries? Why should our manufacturing abilities be so eroded as they are and outsourced to other countries? And then finally, why should the U.S. even consider submitting itself to UN mandates? These are just, to me, the obvious questions. And there's only one answer that makes sense. Because I look at some of these questions and I think, the Obama administration is committing suicide politically in a place like West Virginia when they try to kill the coal industry there. Why would a person do that? If you see every decision through the lens of Agenda 21, it all makes perfect sense. So I think that's part of where this all goes. So here are the things we encourage people to do. And this is something we want to help each of you to do if you're interested. We want to inform city, county, and state elected officials about sustainable development, what all of this is. And again, what you're seeing here is on our website. You can go there and just use it. You could walk into a city elected official with your laptop and just call up the website and walk into it. All you have to do is read it, really. Anyone here could easily do that. So that's one thing. Second thing we're encouraging is wherever we can, eliminate taxpayer funding of organizations such as ICLEI, because they're out there taking our taxes and eroding our property rights. And then finally, this would be great if someone, and this would be a task, not my task, because this would kill me, but we need people who will review ordinances and regulations that are rooted, and discover those ordinances and regulations that are rooted in Agenda 21, and where appropriate, repeal them. And I'm not saying repeal everything. There's probably some good things in there that are worthy, but some of these things, if we allow them to continue, they just take away our rights, and they're killing us economically. Thomas Jefferson is attributed to him that he said this, that the price of freedom is eternal vigilance. And if you're like me, you've been fighting the elections and all of these issues, and we're all tired, I know that. But if we're going to maintain our liberty and freedom, this was required. Arthur Lee was a Virginia columnist, and he said this, that he said the right of property is the guardian of every other right, and to deprive people of this is in fact to deprive them of their liberty. It's great to say I have the right to drive a car, I have a right to an education, I have the right to this, that, and the other. We have so many rights today. But if you go back to it, the one right that will destroy all of the others is the loss of private property rights. When you have private property rights, you have a place where you can live, you can grow your own food, you can eat, you can survive. But once property is taken away, we become dependent on a government, whoever else owns that property. And so I really like his. And the reason we all need to work together, Benjamin Franklin said, if we don't hang together, we will surely hang separately. That was a great quote. So let me share with you, there are the 3 E's of sustainability. I have 3 E's of liberty that I would like to again, go back to. The 3 E's of sustainable liberty are this. Number 1, keep yourself educated. You know, and if we can help inform you and others, we're willing to do that. And you can go on our website or send me an email. We do a weekly newsletter. Be glad to keep you up to date with that. You don't have to become a supporting member to do that. We'll be glad to do that. You can also do that on the website. Number 2 is be equipped. And again, we have this little seminar. It's a 2-hour seminar called The Effective Advocate. Talks about how to take an issue and how to frame it, how to describe it as a violation of private property rights, how do you work with elected officials, how do you build your own movement, you know, keys to things like that. Because one person doing it, we need masses of people to do this because this thing is 20 years down the road. So be equipped, and then finally be engaged. And you know, some places are interested in doing this. We've discovered that, you know, our organization out of Orlando, I can't be everywhere. I'd like to be, but I can't be. So what we're doing is calling on citizens who would like to work in a local area. We would like for you to be a local affiliate of CPR. And what we'll do is we'll give you access to use things and post on our website. We'll let you use our 501c3 to raise finances. We'll, you know, provide the materials. We ask people to agree with our philosophical doctrine, so to speak, which I know everyone here would be. But in exchange for that, it's a way for you to come together and fight whatever your local issue is. Because what you have to fight for up here is different than Northport or Miami-Dade or Jacksonville or St. Augustine, where we're doing some other battles. So we're looking for people who want to be affiliates. All we want to do is help equip you and help you be a part of a larger movement and make you more effective. So those are my 3's to sustain our liberty, and that's what we need to be. Be educated, be equipped, and engaged. And again, let me know if we can help you in any way, and I applaud what you're doing up here and being the Tea Party up here in Tavares and North Lake County. Thank you for that. And let's get out there and work and stop what's going on in November. Oh, I'm sorry.
Has the state of Alabama, I read where the state of Alabama has outlawed.
They have passed legislation that says they want to outlaw any laws that are sustainable development rooted. You have a copy of it? Okay.
This is what I got out of bill drafting this week.
Okay.
I'll be filing this in the Florida Senate this coming year. It says, as used in this section, the term political subdivision has the same meaning as provided in another statute. The state or a political subdivision may not adopt or implement any recommendation for a policy of sustainable development which originates in or is traceable to Agenda 21 as adopted by the United Nations in 1992 at its Conference on Environment and Development, or any other international law or ancillary plan of action which deliberately or inadvertently infringes upon or restricts private property rights without due process, or contravenes the Constitution of the United States or the state constitution. The state or a political subdivision may not enter into any agreement, expend any sum of money, or receive funds for contracting services, and may not give financial aid to or receive financial aid from any non-governmental or intergovernmental organization as provided in Agenda 21, which the United Nations has accredited and enlisted to assist in the implementation of its global policies relative to Agenda 21. This act shall become effective upon, it shall take effect upon becoming law.
Yay.
Florida Senator Alan Hayes.
It's not out on the public web yet. This is just, it's in the preliminary stages.
And that's pretty similar to what Alabama has done, though. And I will be your right-hand man on that, to do whatever I can and mobilize other people as well. I would say the only challenge I find with the Alabama wording, and maybe this one too, is that, you know, how to tie those policies and say this was logged in. We're going to have to define that, because I think that's the details of where the battle's going to be, and it's going to be 100 different areas to search, and who's going to do all that. And this will be interesting to see how the legislation is Florida.
Dan, let me say too, folks, I can promise you that tonight there's probably 10 times the number of people in this room, right here in Lake County, that are members of the organizations that support Agenda 21. We absolutely must mobilize every living, breathing human being to get behind this. They have to understand it. Your 3 E's, I think, are dead on, Dan. The whole thing, I really appreciate what you brought to us tonight. But this is a real daily occurrence in Florida. The conservation needs it. All of this stuff sounds so warm and fuzzy, you just want to cuddle it up and take it home and pet it. And it's going to come up and fight it right in the throat.
It's absolutely true. Thank you for that. Thank you. And I'm going to say you guys are lucky because Senator Hayes was my senator last year and Representative Metz was my representative, but now they're redistricting. I'm sorry. After I ran the campaign against Lee Constantine, I may have to move up here because I'm mud in Seminole County right now. Yes, sir.
Do you know of any Lake County cities that belong with it?
I don't know, but
No.
if you go on their website, it lists all.
There are none. I've checked.
No, okay. There's the full listing on their website. By the way, there's another thing they call cities moving towards sustainable development. That doesn't mean you're a member, but those are cities that are implementing these things. So they also have that, and there's like 5,000 of those in the United States. So keep that in mind.
Is there a list of elected officials that support those?
Not to my knowledge. I haven't found it yet. So
New elected officials that are supporting it.
maybe that's something we'll work on and post on our
Well,
website.
unfortunately, you call most of your elected officials and ask them, do they support Agenda 21? And if they don't give you yes or no answer, they'll say, well, what is Agenda 21?
I know. Where they go.
Yeah, and I would encourage you, really, get a couple of people, and go to your city representative or your county. You can't go to somebody else's, go to yours, that's the key. Because you're a vote, they'll listen to you. And just take the PowerPoint in, just read it. And again, that's all original source stuff. That's not opinion, that's original stuff, and it's all documented in the executive summary, and it's on there in speech form as well. You go on the website, it has something called e-library, that means electronic library. Click on that button, and you will see a tab for Agenda 21, and you will see all of this information and more than you ever want to read on it. But it'll have the links to Agenda 21 at the UN and stuff like that. It's yours for the taking. Yes, ma'am.
Speak up, Diane. Speak up, Diane.
We had True the Vote, and that was up in Wisconsin and all. And I checked it to see because my husband passed away to see if his name was taken off the roll. It was. So True the Vote has really worked. So I think something that electronically after November, we can't quit. We've got to keep on in some way. We individually can go into our large cities, counties, everywhere, and root out all these terrible cuts.
Yes.
That have taken over.
Yeah, November is the start of the real battle.
The first thing I think we need to do is evict the United Nations out of the
And that would largely be at the heart of that. My only caution would be when you say that to people who don't understand the stuff that we understand here, they say, that's a person on the screen, it's a pretty kind of that thing. That's why I tried to build in this PowerPoint. There's nothing fringe about the PowerPoint and the executive summary. It's just, here's the facts about it, and you make the evaluation, but that'd be the fastest solution. If I can be a resource, or if you got groups and you want to speak, or you want to give us stuff, please take it and use it, or let me know how I can help you, okay? Thank you very much.